lift. And as the leader said, I'm a gun owner. I support the Second Amendment. I also carried an assault weapon for tour of duty in Vietnam. I know what they're used for. I know what they're capable of. And personally, I believe there's no place in a civilized society to have these things. We don't need them. We know the damage that they've done, and if you go back, if you go to Sandy Hook, if you go now to Florida, if you go to any of the mass shootings that we've seen, Las Vegas, it is in fact the weapon of choice, and it's the weapon of choice because it was designed to be able to bring pure hell and fury to anyone it's used against.
What specific action could you see Democrats taking in the new Congress in January?
Well, I think first we would address this issue. That's the thing that's most glaringly missed in all of this. We would have a hearing. We would convene both Democrats and Republicans. We'd bring experts to the table. That's something that's been missing in this Congress, if you haven't noticed. You know, we just passed the biggest tax bill in 30 years without a single hearing in the House of Representatives, without hearing from one single expert in the House of Representatives. We just bring this stuff to the floor. We just passed a concealed carry bill in the House with very little discussion about this, and we can't even get a hearing on background checks. So that's would be I would recommend to the leader if, as you point out, we win in November, the Speaker, that we should start with that. We should bring in experts. We should have hearings. We should figure out the best way forward to keep our communities safe.
I just may say also, I don't want to have to wait that long. We could have a select committee right now. Mr. Thompson has had legislation calling for such a select committee. And in putting it forth, he referenced that they've had select committees on what? Benghazi, they've had select committees. Planned Parenthood, any excuse will do, except a serious reason like studying the gun violence prevention issue. We could write on this appropriations bill that is due to end toward the end of March. We could lift the prohibition on actions taken by the Center for Disease Control to talk about prevention in terms of gun safety. And we could bring up the background check legislation, which is bipartisan and overwhelmingly supported by the American people. We could expand it to include gun shows as well as online purchases, but also some other technicalities that we think would tighten it. So it is, there's a lot we can do right now because many people will die. And while you're talking about assault weapons and some of the mass murders that we have seen so cruelly do violence to not only these children and their families and their classmates, but to the character of America, who we are as a country, tolerating such a thing and not preventing it, we could have some serious work done to save lives because, as I say, since you mentioned assault weapons, that's one thing, but every day on our streets, people are killed by gun violence, by pistols, other means of violence in terms of guns. So it's an issue that includes assault weapons, but is much broader than that. Any other questions on this subject? I just want to add, yes, sir, on this.
Yes, ma'am. When you were Speaker,
right,
there were Democrats who were clamoring for hearings in the judiciary on this topic, and they did not get them. Was there any specific reason for that at the time, and do you regret not doing more when you did?
No. Well, let me say what we did do, because I don't remember people clamoring. We all were addressing the issue, but part of the problem was, as was the case with the Dreamers, if I might add, you need 60 votes in the Senate. And so members were like, well, how can we get 60 votes in the Senate? That was more the question, because that was more the hurdle, as just a majority in the House. But what we did do, which I was very proud of when we had the majority, and was to pass our mental health parity legislation, because much is being said about mental health, and it is a factor. It isn't dispositive of the issue. We have to do much more. But when we did, the Republican members came to me, and I won't name their names, they're not in the Congress now, but they said to me, we could never get a bill on a hearing from our own leadership over these past years on mental health parity. We did have the hearing, we did pass the law, we did have it be part of the Affordable Care Act, which now they are trying to unravel. So that was one of the fundamentals of how do we prevent gun violence, was this mental health piece. Very important, and as the distinguished representative from California mentioned, this is part of what they are undoing with their some of their legislation now. So again, this is something where we have to have the public really demand, because we need a majority to get it done, apparently. I wish that weren't the case. And I have said over and over, I'd rather pass gun safety legislation than win the election, because people die from this. So that as a priority for me is one that I have always had. And now, of course, as a mother and a grandmother, and seeing these children at risk at a place they should feel very safe is just unthinkable. Something that should never happen in our country, and other people wonder. But it is something that's going to require 60 votes in the Senate. And even I know, and I think I'll yield to Mr. Thompson, if this background check were brought up in the House, it would win. Under a Republican Congress, with bipartisan support for it, it would win. And so we're saying, just give us a vote. Just give us a vote. Now, with the much higher visibility of this issue than it was 10 years ago or so, I think that there might be a chance to prevail in the Senate. But I can't speak for the Senate.
Well, I think that's an important point. One thing that's different between now and 6 years ago was it started with Sandy Hook, which was just, that shook everybody in this country to the bone. And now we've had repeat performances, the last of which was yesterday, but not the last one to happen. There's going to be more tragedy. We know that. So things have changed across the country, not just in Congress. And just looking out, a lot of young people here today. Some of you have kids. Some of you have kids. This was a school yesterday where kids went to learn, and kids didn't come home from school. I'm the father of a cop. I don't want my kid on the street protecting his community when people who shouldn't have guns have guns. I don't want my grandkids going off to school or work with a situation like this.
Did you want to talk about California for a moment?
In regard to?
What the law is there, that even if you wanted to.
California it's a little bit stricter. So in California, if you buy a gun, you have to have a background check. So if I bought a gun from my son, who's the cop, if he legally owned a gun, and he, like me, owns a bunch of them, but if he wanted to sell me a gun or transfer me a gun, if he said, Dad, I want to give you this gun, we have to go to a licensed dealer, and I would have to get a background check.
Even within the family.
And then in California, there's also a 10-day waiting period. So for those of you who covered the tragedy in Mr. Clyburn's district, when the guy went into the church and killed the people who were in a prayer group there, if you remember, that person should not have been able to buy a gun. But it was an overlapping jurisdiction, city or county or something. And when they went to do the background check on him, there was a delay. And it came back. They didn't clear him, but they couldn't positively say he was prohibited. And the base law, the federal law under which they were operating, said that if you can't identify someone as prohibited within 3 days, you have to give them the gun. So that guy never got a complete background check. They knew there was a problem, but they couldn't identify it. He got the gun, and he went into that church and murdered those people. California has a 10-day waiting period, so you have more time to figure out if somebody should or shouldn't have guns.
I want to commend Mr. Thompson for the work he did when we did have the majority, too, in terms of expanding the NICS background check system. Are you familiar with NICS? Okay, so the NICS Improvement Act requires federal agencies to submit mental health records. We passed this in 2007 when President Bush was president and was signed into law. Now, what Mr. Thompson was talking about earlier was that the administration wants to take $20 million out of that initiative. And that was really bipartisan. President Bush signed that. We had bipartisan support for it.
And the amendment that where we augmented that.
More recently.
Yeah, my amendment on the floor, we augmented that by, I believe it was around that same amount, around $20 million. That was bipartisan also. I think we got 70 Republicans to vote for that.
And that was recent. Yeah. That was recent. But what we do have to do is go to this place. Mr. Speaker, you have a select committee for almost anything. Why not for this really important priority for the American people? We have bipartisan support for legislation that 95% of the American people support. Improving the background check legislation, expanding that, and also, what is it that we have this legislation passed, put forth by my former but also deceased colleague, Mr. Dickey from Arkansas, that put a chilling effect on what the CDC could do in terms of gun violence prevention. You have the letter. We can show you the letter that he sent saying, that's not what I intended. Did you want to speak to that?
I served with Jay Dickey, and when this became an issue, I telephoned him in retirement, and he said, that's not what I intended. I did not want my legislative action to prohibit or get in the way of the CDC doing any of this work. It's important work. We should do it. I think the example he used, he said, we study situations with automobile deaths as well. That doesn't mean we want to do away with automobiles. And when I have his letter, I've probably passed it out to some of you many times over the last 5 years. But it's something that should be it should be dealt with. What is the harm in collecting data to try and figure out why people do the things that they do? It's the prudent way to do business.
Yes, ma'am. On this subject? A different subject. I just wanted to then just close on this to say that we hope that we will have more than a moment of silence. Certainly, we pray for the families. Again, America's heart is broken. Ironic, it was Ash Wednesday. Some of the victims there had ashes. It was Valentine's Day. The kids had gone in a different spirit and what that day would be about. Little did they know that they'd be victims of such useless, preventable violence in our country, and the large number of people who are deceased and who are seriously injured, and we pray for their recovery. But again, it's an assault on our whole country. And they are paying the price for our inaction. As I've said on the floor many times, whose political survival in this body is more important than the survival of our children, for example, most recently yesterday, Sandy Hook, for example, or on the streets of our cities? Who of us in here is more important, whose political survival is more important than that? Nobody's. Nobody. So we have to be bold, we have to go forward, and we cannot let the National Rifle Association and its many, however they get their money, and that's another subject, to decide what the character of America is. And speaking of the character of America, as you know, the President put forth his budget this week. A budget is supposed to be, our federal budget is supposed to be a statement of our national values. What is important to us as a country is supposed to be reflected in how we allocate our resources to make the future brighter for our children, to keep our people safe, both globally and locally and personally, and how we, again, create jobs for the 21st century, reduce the deficit, lower taxes. really lower taxes for the middle class. So again, as I've said to you before, there's a dark cloud hanging over this Congress, and that's called the GOP tax scam, a tax bill that gives 83% of its benefits to the top 1%, where 86 million middle-class families will be paying more in taxes. That increases the deficit. Now, Mulvaney has even admitted yesterday that it's going to cost the taxpayer more. We're going to go deeper into debt. He's saying now 1.8 trillion with interest. That's over 2 trillion, which is the number Richie Neal has been using all along, admitting that. And so we've mortgaged our children's future in order to give a big tax break to corporate America. And now, what was so obvious and what the Republicans did not keep a secret, I have to give them credit. They were very open about it. We're going to have a deficit, and we're going to have to compensate for that by cutting Medicare, which they do in their budget, by $500 billion, and Medicaid, which they do by $1.4 trillion. And the list goes on. Social Security, disability insurance, cut back. The list goes on and on. It is not a statement of values of the American people. It repeals the Affordable Care Act, raising health costs and taking health coverage away from millions. It education job, we were talking about jobs for the 21st century, $200 billion in cuts from student loan initiatives, freezes Pell Grants. Farmers and rural America cuts 15% from the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, and key rural water and energy initiatives. Hungry families, cuts $214 billion from food stamps. The president's going to give them a box of processed food. That's what a box of processed food.
Just like Blue Apron.
Yeah, just like that. And infrastructure, again, at the same time, the black cloud their predicate is this tax cut, which is everything to them. It's in their DNA that they will have trickle-down tax cuts at the high end, a banquet for everyone up here, crumbs for people down here. I repeat that. The speaker brags about somebody getting $1.50 a month, and in a year she'll get $60 and she can pay her Costco entry fee or something. Really? Really? While others get tens of thousands of dollars in tax cuts in the top 1%, and corporate America, of course, billions of dollars. So then he comes up with an infrastructure proposal, which is something that we've all been waiting for, that was supposed to be due a year ago, $1.1 trillion, $1.5 trillion. No, it's $200 billion over 10 years. So we're talking about $20 billion over 10 years. And when we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about the greatness of America. We're talking about think big, plan grandly, not let's just see how little I can do. And then, on the other hand, say to cities, certain communities, you have to pay 80% of the share, we'll pay 20, meaning that, and on top of taking away their state and local tax deduction, they're having a debilitating impact on infrastructure. Democrats, again, have a better, their plan would force Americans to pay higher tolls and fees, sell off critical public infrastructure to the whims of Wall Street, increase the burden of states and cities, ends vital worker environmental protections. We have a better deal. We have a better deal to rebuild America, rebuilding our crumbling roads and bridges, modernizing our rail systems, ports, waterways, build our schools. You were here, some of you, when we made the presentation last week with our committees of jurisdiction under leadership of Ranking Member DeFazio. Creates more than 16 million jobs, good-paying American jobs, lowers costs for consumers, unlocks the economic potential of rural communities and small businesses, and turbocharges the economy, bringing money into the Treasury. We're trying to revive the economy and with a transformational plan. It's 5 times larger than what President Trump is putting forth. So here we have the trifecta. They always like to go in threes. Increase the deficit by giving tax cuts to the high end in corporate America. And then say, oh my gosh, we created a deficit. We have to have a budget that addresses that. Let's cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, disabilities, insurance, food stamps, all the rest. And now what's our big initiative for jobs for the 21st century? Well, let's think very small, and let's do so in a way that's similar to the tax bill, that it is trickle down. It is the taxpayer subsidizing initiatives where the profit goes to the private sector and the tolls are paid by the commuter and the consumer, and the whole bill is paid by the taxpayer. It's just not right. So this is what we'll be talking about over the break as we go around the country. I have to give the Republicans credit, though. They are totally consistent. It's all about the high end, and they make no mistake about it. And then they have the audacity to say, well, it's going to pay for itself, when the very architects of that trickle-down supply side have said anybody who tells you that it's going to pay for itself it's not true, it's nonsense, it's BS spelled out. Any questions? Is that on that?
Pelosi, on immigration, what do you think about the Rams-King proposal over in the Senate? And also, do you have any reaction to DHS's statement that they put out this morning about that proposal?
I didn't see their statement. We've been really practically in mourning all morning on the subject of guns. I didn't see what they had to say, but if it's anything like what the president is saying, it's not useful. But I can't speak to it because I don't know what they said. But I don't know I think this is all still in the works. Let me comment when I see what the Senate puts forth. But I'm glad that Mitch McConnell is at least honoring his statement that he would bring a bill to the floor. We hope that the Speaker would respect the dignity of the House of Representatives and give us a chance to vote on bipartisan legislation to protect the Dreamers. I know they'll be protected. They have to be protected. We just have to do it in a shorter period of time. Yes, sir.
Just following up on that, where do you think the deadline is to deal with the docket issue? It sounds like the Speaker's giving the House really until the end of March to debate immigration. That's kind of what his timeline was as far as what he said yesterday.
Well, anyone who says that we have until the end of March doesn't really understand the gravity of the situation or ignores what is. I feel like the Music Man. Have you know that song? The pool table in your community. Anyway, we got trouble in River City. Well, we have trouble in River City if they think, you go look that up, you'll see it's perfect for this. They either are ignoring.
You know what that is?
Have you ever heard of that? You ever heard of that? Because in one of our press meetings, I said to somebody, when I first came to Congress, there were only 3 networks, and the young man said to me, "You mean like CBS and ABC?" I said, that would be considered a network. Anyway, we did have CNN at that time too, so that not a network. Okay, here's the thing. The president, let's just give him the benefit of the doubt. On September 5th, he put forth a proposal to say he was rescinding the executive order on DACA that President Obama had put forth. I'm going to do this fast because the Speaker is going to come in here in a minute. He needs the room. He put that forth. He said, well, give him until March 5th for Congress to correct the situation. Either he did not know the gravity of the situation as to what this meant in the lives of the DACA recipients. Let's say he didn't, but it removed protections for them, to the tune of over 100 of them losing their status, their protections every day. Now over 15,000 losing protections, even if you talk about to March 5th, which is the date that his bill, that he gave Congress until 6 months. When he did lift he rescinded DACA, I was very proud that the National Catholic Conference of Bishops called his action reprehensible, because that's exactly what it was, reprehensible. But let me give him the benefit of the doubt that he didn't understand the situation. For the Speaker to say this could go to March 5th, the end of March, means he doesn't know the fear that they have instilled into the families and into the hearts of these children. And that's why we will continue to make this fight. And what is it that they're waiting for? What is it that they have against young people who are making such a beautiful contribution to our country? As I read some of my members' letters from Dreamers, their own testimonies about how much they love America, how much they give back to America, how they serve in our armed services, how they're a resource to us in our providing health care in our community, and the list goes on. So in any event, I don't think the end of March has viability to it. Let's just get on with it. What are you afraid of? Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. I have constituents of mine who were born in the United States of America, U.S. citizens, who will not leave their house without their passport because of this situation. I have kids that are as afraid as anybody else's kids. I have an increasing number of phone calls to my district offices every day, people reporting suspicious cars parked down the street, suspicious car across from the daycare center, worried is that ICE. I get calls constantly and in meetings in my district with law enforcement who tell me that this is destroying a strong trust between immigrant communities and local law enforcement and making our entire communities unsafe. Deadline? This is long past due.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mike.